With the PlayStation Vita coming back into the spotlight after Sony threatened to shut down the digital store, I figured now would be an appropriate time to finally count down my top 10 Vita JRPGs. Because as we all know,
Vita means life.
The Vita was loaded with amazing JRPGs, but I think there will be some on this list you might not be expecting. But before we dig into that list, I need to tell you about today's sponsor, one of the best shooters of 2020, Frag Pro Shooter. Frag Pro Shooter is a free-to-play online multiplayer shooter designed with mobile devices in mind. It's super easy to get the hang of and control. Frag was also designed with skill in mind, so the better you can utilize your team, the better you'll do. The base game mode is simple. You build a deck of 5 characters and try to drop the enemy's points to 0 before they drop your points to 0. You can do this by destroying the enemy bunker or simply by fragging enough enemies to drop their points. And if you really want to up the action, you can play in the 2v2 mode, which adds an extra player to each team for some chaotic action. Right now my favorite characters to play are Jet and Amelie. I love Jet because she can fly around and it really gives her a huge advantage, and Amelie for her precision shooting. Frag Pro Shooter also has a roster of over 90 characters with tons coming all the time, including the latest one, Darius. And if you use my link in the description, you can get $6 worth of rewards that includes 500 gold coins, 50 diamonds, and 1 gold chest. So be sure to check out Frag Pro Shooter today with the link in the description. Kicking off this list we have ORESHIKA Tainted Bloodlines. Now I talked about this in my last video, so I'll keep it brief and let you know all about it. As far as the story goes, your family was cursed for not protecting a certain number of treasures, so your family was killed and your bloodline was cursed, only being able to live for 2 years. But the gods of this world take pity on you and allow you to get revenge. So this game is sort of like a JRPG roguelike. You can use characters for 2 in-game years before you have to play as 2 new children in your bloodline. These new characters carry over stats and gear from your previous characters, and the goal is you're trying to destroy this demon. Now your time in the game is split between dungeon crawling and outfitting your town and characters at your base. Now while you're dungeon crawling, you'll have turn-based combat, and this combat is really fast-paced and pretty fun. There's 8 different character classes in the game, and each moveset hits different rows and different spots on the battlefield. And what's interesting is you always have to keep time in mind, because no matter what you're doing, whether you're exploring dungeons, adjusting your characters back at the town, or picking different movesets, everything moves time forward. Now maybe from minute to minute you won't feel a great sense of progression, but because you're constantly changing characters and you have this really long timeline of your bloodline, there's a great sense of progression over the course of the game. And if it wasn't obvious already, this has an amazingly gorgeous art style. ORESHIKA is one of the few remaining Vita exclusives and one of Vita's most unique games, so absolutely make sure you check it out. Next on the list, I have Ys 8 LACRIMOSA of Dana. Now before you riot for me putting this game so low on the list, allow me to explain. I love Ys 8, it's a great game. On PS4, and PC and Switch. The Vita version removes a lot of the Dana content, the frame rate isn't really that good, and because of that, the combat doesn't flow as well. But if all you have is a Vita, it's still worth playing. Once again, you play as Adol and he's been shipwrecked on a mysterious island. Throughout the game, you're trying to rescue passengers that have been shipwrecked all over this island, and you're trying to uncover the mysteries it has. Throughout the game, you'll learn about a mysterious character named Dana and how she's connected to everything, and how her and Adol are sharing these memories. Now, like any Ys game, it has great action combat where you'll be swapping between different characters, and these different characters have different attack types that certain monsters are weak to, so you kind of have to keep swapping the different characters, and it's just super fun. And exploring this island is just so addicting. There's different landmarks you can find all over the place, there's so many different passengers to rescue who can do things for you back at your base, there's tons of side quests, the combat, as I said, is just so good, and of course, it has great bosses. And I couldn't forget the excellent music. Some of the highlights are obviously Sunshine Coastline that you're listening to now, as well as tons of other boss themes. Now, I will be honest, the Vita version is probably your last resort if you haven't played this game already, but if that's all you got, it's absolutely worth a play. One of the other few Vita exclusives on this list, and the only game made internally at a first-party studio, is Freedom Wars. Now this was PlayStation's answer to Monster Hunter when Monster Hunter decided to go with Nintendo instead of PlayStation after the PSP. Now I know most people don't consider hunting games RPGs, but this is my list and I make the rules, so it's staying on the list. Now Freedom Wars has a pretty unique premise. The game takes place in the super far dystopian future and the world is overpopulated. And because of this, if you commit any crime, whether you're innocent or not, you get put in jail. And there's some really ridiculous crimes like literally just being alive. In fact, your character is guilty of that and you're serving a 1 million year sentence. Now the only way to get your 1 million year sentence down is to fight these monsters called abductors. Now, like I said, this game plays like a Monster Hunter game, but there is much more of a focus on the story. And I would say maybe too much of the story. You'll be walking around in your hub world and you can kind of talk to different characters and get a sense of what's going on, but sometimes you just want to get right to the action and can take a little too long. Now what's cool is you fight these mechanized weapons called abductors, and they do sort of serve like monsters in Monster Hunter. They have parts that break off, they have different parts that you can attack, they have certain weaknesses, and some of the missions are just killing them, but some of them are rescuing civilians or just finding items around the world. Now what I think really makes Freedom Wars worth playing is the fun kinetic combat. Of course you have a melee weapon to hack and slash away, but you also have a gun that you can swap to, and probably the coolest mechanic in the game, the grappling wire. Now the grappling wire can be used to move around. You can latch onto walls, you can kind of just whip yourself around and move faster, but you can also pull down enemies and use that as an attack weapon. Now back when this game came out, this was when Attack on Titan just came out, and this was really the only game of its kind at the time that felt like you were playing kind of an Attack on Titan game, and obviously there are Attack on Titan games now, but still, there is some really fun, awesome movement in this game, especially for a handheld, that makes it worth playing. Now whether you like a good hunting game or a good action RPG with fun movement, definitely check out Freedom Wars. And the last true Vita exclusive that we're going to talk about on this list, we have Tales of HEARTSR. Now the original game was a DS game that never left Japan, so we were really lucky to get this remake for the Vita. Now the general plot is you play as Core, and he lives on this little island with his grandfather, and he wields a powerful weapon called a soma. Now he gets mixed up with some new friends, and he ventures out into the world to try to save one of these friends. There's some more details to that, but I don't want to spoil the plot. Now the general gameplay is what you've come to know from the series. Great action combat, dungeons you explore, tons of puzzles, you'll be heading to different towns, and so on. Basically, if you like a Tales game, you're probably gonna like Tales of HEARTSR. Now I have to say, this is one of the more impressive looking Vita games. Maybe the best looking game on this list, possibly outside of Freedom Wars. The character models look really great, it has solid animations, the environments are decently detailed for a Vita game, it looks really nice. Now, even though it's a handheld game, you could easily get 40 hours of playtime out of this game. One thing I will say though is that physical copies are going for over $100 right now on eBay, so if you're interested in this game, I might go digital because, yeah, $100 is a little much for a single game. Now, there are plenty of DISGAEA options on the Vita, but the one I wanted to go with is DISGAEA 3. And the main reason for that is the story. In the game, you play as Mao, the son of the underworld's overlord. Now, he's attending basically an evil school where he's learning to do evil things, which is just kind of a funny premise on its own. But also, Mao wants to overthrow his father because he destroyed his gaming systems. And I just love this. DISGAEA games usually have these weird tongue-in-cheek stories, and of all of them, DISGAEA 3 is easily my favorite. And what really helps is the voice acting. It's got some really solid voice acting, and because of that, I just always wanted to see what happened next in the plot. Now, for the uninitiated, DISGAEA games are basically a series of strategy RPGs. The combat is turn-based over a grid-based map, and you have to either defeat all the enemies on the screen or make it to an exit. For the most part, DISGAEA games are really tongue-in-cheek, wacky. There's a lot of crazy, silly moves, like you can throw enemies, you're doing like thousands, if not millions of damage. It's pretty crazy. And also, DISGAEA games are known for giving you lots of value as a player. One of the biggest things is the item world. Essentially, you can explore each of your items that you have, whether it be a weapon, a piece of armor, or an accessory. And this particular version of DISGAEA 3 has even more value because not only does it have all the DLC from the PS3 version, but also added tons of extras, including one of my favorite things, animated character portraits. And there were plenty of quality strategy RPGs on the Vita, but this was my personal favorite, and if you haven't played it already, definitely give it a look. And maybe the first surprise on this list, I have Cosmic Star Heroine. This was made by Zeboyd Games, creators of the Cthulhu series of RPGs. Now in this game, it takes place in a futuristic city and you play as Alyssa, an agent of the Agency of Peace and Intelligence. She's sent out on a mission to retrieve mysterious items, but these items have more sinister powers than she realizes, and she kind of has to go rogue to do what's right. Now the plot is good enough to keep the story going, and you're probably going to want to know what happens next, but I feel like the true draw of this game is its unique spin on turn-based combat. You have a set of abilities that you can only use once before you need to recharge them, so this incentivizes you to use other moves you might not normally try and avoids repetitive battles. And the other interesting thing is there's no grinding. In each area there's only a set amount of enemies on each map, although you can respawn the enemies if you want to, but you don't need to do that. And also there's really no item management. Items refresh every battle and party members revive after every battle and your HP gets refilled. So there's no going into items, trying to like waste potions, going into inns, none of that. It just gets to the good stuff without all the fluff. Not to mention Cosmic Star Heroine has amazing pixel work and an incredible soundtrack by Hyperduck Soundworks. So whether you play it on Vita, where I think it's right at home, or on another system, definitely check out this gem if you haven't already. Next up, we have Tokyo XANADU. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to wonder, why is this higher on Ys 8 when in my top 10 JRPGs video, it was the other way around?
I'll show you.
It really comes down to this. Sure, it doesn't run great on Vita, but it doesn't take away from the experience as much as Ys 8 running poorly does. It's a little pixelated and sure, it doesn't run at 60 frames per second, but it still works great. And weirdly enough, I hated the extra content they added to the PS4 version. I felt like it just really ruined the flow of the game, so the Vita version might arguably be better. But again, what exactly is Tokyo XANADU? As I mentioned in tons of other videos, Tokyo XANADU is like if you took Persona and mashed it together with Ys combat. Seriously, it's almost exactly that. The game takes place in a Japanese high school, you travel to a parallel world, fight monsters that are slowly invading your own world, and spend time with your friends to level up their usefulness in combat. There's also fun side activities like going to arcades and skateboarding. To me, I really enjoyed the dungeons. Sure, the design is simple, but there's always something to keep you interested, whether it's breaking boxes, swapping to different characters, being forced to use different characters because certain enemies in that dungeon are only weak to certain attack types, and so on. And the cast, while tropey, are great. They all serve a purpose in the story, and it's always fun to interact with them during the social events or just hearing what happens in the main story. I also feel like Tokyo XANADU has a really underrated soundtrack. It's got that synth J-pop feel that I really like, and maybe you will too. Now, Tokyo XANADU is available on PS4 and PC, but if you want to play it handheld and are willing to deal with some performance dips, it might be worth checking out on Vita. And speaking of Falcom action RPGs, we have Ys Origin. And while we are talking about the Vita version, it doesn't really take a performance bump. It feels right at home on Vita. Now what's interesting is this is actually a prequel to Ys Books 1 and 2, and you don't play as Adol. You play as either Yunica or Hugo, or a third character after you beat the game. There is some good story moments with some interesting twists, but Ys Origin is all about the gameplay. You'll be hacking and slashing your way through a massive tower, getting different equipment that'll help you get through the tower, like ways that you can go through different environments, and you'll be fighting great bosses. Overall, the gameplay is just so addicting. The grinding actually feels good. If you fight a boss and you can't quite beat him, it's fun to just kind of go back into the room and just grind forever because the gameplay is that good. Now, as I said, you do have multiple characters to play as if you want to play this game over again, because the game is relatively short in one playthrough, about 8 hours, but because there are 3 different characters to play as, you can get a lot of value out of this game. Now, it is available on quite a few other platforms, but honestly, I think it might be perfect on Vita. What can I say? Ys had a heck of a run on Vita, and I had to include one more, Ys Memories of CELCETA. Once again, you play as Adol exploring a giant forest trying to recover his memories. Real original plot there, Falcom. But actually, it works pretty well. As you explore the forest, you'll get small little snippets of Adol's memories, and you try to piece together what's happening. And me personally, I love a good mystery, so it was really fun to just get these little vignettes and try to figure out what was going on. Now, of course, this continues the modern Ys formula. Great action combat, character swapping, each of the different characters having a different attack type, great bosses and music, and it's just fun. Now, this has been ported to other systems, but I feel like the Vita version might be the most unique version because it has a lot of cool mechanics using the touchscreen. Now, I'm not totally sure how the other versions get around this, but on the Vita version, you utilize the touchscreen to kind of manipulate puzzle pieces and stuff like that, and it's just really fun. I also think it has some really great portrait art and art for the flashbacks. In some of the more modern Ys games, they drop the character portrait art, but I actually really enjoy it, so it's kind of nice to see it here. I will say the environments do get a little repetitive because it's mostly just a big forest, but everything else in the game is just so good that it really doesn't matter. In my opinion, this has been one of the more overlooked Ys games in recent years, so if you haven't checked this one out, definitely do it because it's really worth your time. I mean, did anyone not see this coming? Do I even have to explain Persona 4 Golden again? It's got an amazing cast of characters, compelling plot, addicting gameplay, and killer music. It's my favorite game of all time in case you didn't know that. You know what, instead of me explaining this again, why don't you just check out this video right here called Why I Love Persona 4. It'll go into deep detail and you'll know more about me and why it's my favorite game. And special thanks once again to Frag Pro Shooter for sponsoring this video. To start playing for free and to get $6 worth of in-game items for free, click the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.